Right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I say morning because some of you are on the other side of the Atlantic joining us, so welcome. Thank you for taking the time to dial into this 30-minute webinar about cutting-edge social analytics. My name is Elaine Phillips, and I'm the Head of Communications Evaluation here in one of the UK government departments, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I'm also Board Director for the international organisation that's sponsoring this, which is AMEC, sponsoring Measurement Week. And I also sit on the Chartered Institute of Public Relations social media panel here in the UK. What we're going to do is kick off this session. As most of you will know, it is Measurement Week this week, a global campaign by AMEC to really highlight the importance of measurement within communications, a really sexy subject for those of you that know me. We've been working on this for some time. So there are a range of events going on this week, from webinars to sessions to workshops, and so it's not too late to sign up. On the AMEC website, you can go ahead and sign up to events throughout the rest of the week. So today we're going to hear from a very special speaker, Alistair Wheate. Alistair is a lead consultant at Gorkana Group. Gorkana specialises in global media and social media intelligence, and it's the top in its field, always getting involved in AMEC activities throughout the year. So thank you for that, Gorkana and Alistair. I can say with great confidence that Alistair is one of the most knowledgeable people I know in the field of social analytics. So welcome to you, Alistair. For some technical information for those of you dialing in, participants will automatically be muted, so we won't be able to hear you. It just avoids any background noise and any sound issues technically for us. But please do submit questions to the speakers if you wish to via the questions tab on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen there. We'll put any of your questions to Alistair slightly later on in the session. And in case you do have any technical issues, we have our resident expert, Graham Ellerly, online to assist. And he's available via the chat tab, also at the bottom left there of your screen. So if you have any technical issues there, enter your problem in the chat box and just submit it to Graham from that little drop-down menu at the bottom before you press send. And he will then personally come back and assist you as needed. You'll see on the screen there, and I hope you can see this, that we've got a hashtag for today's session, and it is AMEC at Work. So hashtag AMEC at Work, AMEC@TWORK. And if you can join us on Twitter, please do so and use the hashtag. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alistair to crack on with his really interesting talk. Alistair.
Hello everyone. So unfortunately I don't sound quite half as busy as Elaine, but I work at Gorkana heading up our social media analytics work. You can find me in various places. So there's my email address and my Twitter account, and also be happy to connect with people on LinkedIn afterwards. And there's the hashtag again. Just if you want to send us questions, do send it to the webinar portal. If there's any questions that you've got at the end that we don't get time to, just tweet us using the hashtag, and we can try and answer you on Twitter later. I'm going to talk about a couple of things today, because we're focusing on measurement. And when it comes to social media analysis, there's two areas that I come across all sectors that are often particularly challenging. One is the area of sentiment analysis, because there's loads of tools out there that do it with varying degrees of success. But also want to talk about how to dissect data in social. So when you've maybe done your search, you've got your big results. Sometimes it's only when you actually start slicing through the data that you can really see what's going on. And it's only when you start slicing the data that you start to get real insights into, for example, how your mainstream media coverage is affecting your social media discussions, or vice versa. And also it can be used in conjunction with sentiment analysis to get a clearer view about what people think about you in relation to your products or your services, or things that people have said about you. So first of all, look at automated sentiment analysis. So anyone on this call who's used any social media monitoring tool will probably have come across automated sentiment and will be aware of the limitations. So any language has got its idioms and its sarcasms and different sort of shorthand forms and various different things that can confuse a machine. So automated sentiment has its uses, but I'm just going to go through some of the ways to make the most out of automated sentiment analysis, but not to maybe get stuck with some of the pitfalls. So just want to first of all look at these two brands. Okay, so just want to think about, you may guess this is a trick question, but which brand is doing better here? Brand 1, brand 2. So brand 1 here is getting about 75% positive to negative mentions. I'm stripping out here, by the way, the neutral content, whereas brand 2 has actually got slightly more negative than positive. And you may look at that and think, well, obviously brand 1 is doing much better in terms of sentiment than brand 2. And I think it's also typically the kind of problem where you can get into. A lot of the clients I work with, or that we start working with, do some kind of sentiment analysis about themselves. Maybe their social media analytics is all based around what are people saying about us, how many retweets did we get, or what do people mention us in forums or blogs, and what's the sentiment analysis. My main point really from just this talk is actually you can't really say anything about sentiment if you're just looking at yourself alone. So, for example, if I tell you that these two brands are actually Benecol and Vodafone, now does that on its own change how you think about those two brands in terms of which one's actually doing better in social? Well, again, that might give you a clue. Maybe people more likely to say something nice about a Yoghurt brand, or less likely to say something about a utilities provider like Vodafone. But then let's just go a bit further on. Now, what we've actually done here is we track a whole load of Yoghurt brands. We've been doing so for a number of years, and we can actually see that generally speaking, when people are talking about yogurts on social media, they're much more likely to say something positive, because people buy a pot of yogurt and they feel the urge to go and tell the world via social media that they like it, and they do silly tweets like, yummy, I'm eating a Muller corner or something like that. I don't personally have that urge, but there's thousands of people, millions even, who do. Whereas mobile phone operators, the sentiment to them is generally quite negative overall, because people feel that if they're paying a lot of money to these guys, that it should always work. And if anything goes wrong, they don't get help straight away, they go to social media and they'll complain about it. And often they'll go and tweet directly to the brands. Whereas some people may say something positive about a mobile phone operator, perhaps they've just switched to it from another network and they're happy, or a lot of the mobile phone providers, both here in the UK and in the States, spend a lot of money on advertising, and they sometimes do really cool and clever stuff in their ads, and people engage with that and say nice things about them, and that's the job. So that gives you a bit of a better view as to how those two brands are looked at before. So Benecol, even though it's 3-to-1 positive to negative, that's actually quite a bit worse than the average for the industry. So when you look at that in the context of the wider industry, you can see Benecol's not actually doing so well. They're below the competitors, whereas Vodafone, actually they're doing better, because the average for the mobile phone industry is actually even worse than that. So you can say Vodafone, although they've got more negative and positive sentiment, they're actually doing good. They're doing better than what is typical for their industry. So simple point here is actually, if you're doing social media sentiment, or you're including social media sentiment in your reporting, and you're not looking at the average across your industry, you're not looking at generally people talking about the type of service. You may not actually have competitors, maybe for charity, or might be that you're far ahead of your competitors in this volume. You need to look at people talking about the subject matter, because it's generally my experience that what people say about you as a brand is going to be more determined by what your business is than what you do as a brand, as a business yourself. So, for example, what people say about you as a telecoms provider will be more determined by how people talk about telecoms than what they think about your specific brand. Or again, if it's a charity sector, people will be more, the sentiment that you include in your report will be more determined by how people think about the subject matter rather than what they necessarily think about you. So you have to have this sort of wider benchmarking in place. Otherwise, the analysis that you're putting for your own brand is not going to really mean a lot. So then again, if we just look at the industry as a whole for the telecom providers, again, the vast majority of content in social is neutral in tone. We partner with Brandwatch, this is where we get the data analytics from, and the focus here is looking for what's good or what's bad. So again, sentiment analysis is telling you, looking for emotive language, not necessarily what's good or what's bad for your brand. So, for example, we do a lot of social media monitoring now with UNICEF, and there's loads of people tweeting about vaccines that UNICEF have done, or various different things that UNICEF has done, but often that comes through as neutral in tone, whereas in fact obviously that's great for people knowing about what they do. And again, if you are an NGO, or you're a campaign, you've got a campaign, an information campaign that you want to get out, you may just see anything that has the message or the campaign in it. as being positive. So again, that's where automated sentiment analysis is not going to really help you, but you may need to supplement it with other techniques. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So again, if we look then we take the neutral out. So try to strip out neutral in your social media analytics. Focus on the ratio of positive to negative. We look at the different brands here. We can see that they're all about sort of 50-50, to a little bit more positive in this time period. Again, that was kind of driven a little bit by some of their marketing activities. Whereas EE, which has been at Orange and T-Mobile together, was doing significantly worse than the average. So just to give some tips then about how to treat automated sentiment analysis is, first of all, be aware that mistakes will be made. There's always going to be times when your automated scoring system is going to get confused by the language that people use. And I've seen there's loads of webinars and people, with examples of, oh yes, the silly automated scoring system, look what it's done wrong. And there's ways to say that, humans will always be better. And yes, we are going to be better analysing it. But the more data you have, the bigger the numbers that you put in, the less those smaller mistakes are going to have an impact on the overall result. So the more data that you can analyse, the better. So you may kind of get things skewed month by month, but if you look at things over a longer time period, it depends on the volumes that you get as an organisation. But if you've only got small volumes month by month, and you're just relying on automated scoring, that can really skew the results. So you may want to actually look at sentiment across a larger time period, or rely more on manual analysis. It's also worth saying that the shorter the piece of content that's being analysed, the less likely it is to be wrong, because when you're looking at a forum or a blog, you quite often have a variety of mixed messages, and those are the sort of things, again, that can confuse an AI. So sometimes focusing on maybe forum posts, but definitely Twitter and Facebook, you're more likely to get a safer result. And focusing on positive and negative, I've actually said that already. But then the next point is to understand what the sentiment looks like for the category as a whole before you then look at the specific brands involved. So try to go for that first, just so you get an idea of what the lay of the land looks like, and then you can start delving into individual brands. You may also want to exclude from the data set that you bring into this tweets from your own account, just because obviously that is going to be more positive, and do the same for your competitors. But you may also want to take out competition. So if you've got a tool that has this capability, Brandwatch does, and there are others that do this as well, you may want to just try and write a rule that tags stuff that is a competition, retweet to win or competition giveaway, because often those get treated as positive. And you really want to try and strip that out of your analysis. So when it comes to your sentiment scoring, you want to exclude the results from that you've got in that tag. And you may also want to then, depending on the nature of your business, quite often there'll be loads of other social media profiles that are trying to sell your stuff. It's not just you trying to sell your stuff. So you may want to put then any of the major accounts that are reselling your stuff and create some kind of an exclude to take them out of the results. And finally, also, if you've got a campaign, you may want to include the campaigns in your results, but if you're looking for the kind of more organic, how do people feel about us as a brand, you may want to also exclude campaigns from there as an overall result. And that could be really easy if you've got a hashtag or something that brings the whole campaign together. But basically, the stuff that you have left over after taking those elements out is going to be more your kind of raw, what do people actually think about us view of the data. The final thing is also to watch out for spikes. Sometimes you may see a comedian that tweeted something that's really funny, or some celebrity said something, and that can create a big spike of just retweets. Retweets are lazy, really. Anybody can retweet it. They could be a core audience or not. And again, jokes are often the sort of thing that can really confuse an automated sentiment scoring tool. So you may actually want to. Typically, what I'll do is I'll look for the outliers. I'll look for the biggest thing that drove positive commentary and the biggest single thing that drove negative. Quite often there'll be a bit of a blip, but there may be a joke or just one little instance. And you may actually want to take the top negative and top positive out, just because they may skew overall results. Okay, so hopefully that's just a bit of an overall recommendation for how to approach automated sentiment analysis. If you've got the budget, or you've got the internal capabilities, or you just fancy doing it because you're a masochist and you like manually scoring sentiment, then go ahead and do some manual scoring. I would recommend, if you do get a lot of content, take a random sample, or take a sample that's based upon a particular sensitive subject, if that's what your focus is, like a product launch or a campaign. And then, we at Gorkana, we do quite a lot of manual sentiment scoring, and again, I'd say use it where it's appropriate. And if you are going to do it over time, then benchmark against a random sample that's statistically viable. 5% in many cases is sufficient as a percentage to then do some manual scoring. I just want to say a bit about dissecting the data. Now I'm at Defra, so thought it's maybe good to have a plot that's been cut open. But I want to talk about here about getting your scalpel out and actually going into detail about some of the data. So going back to our pie chart before, looking at EE, this was the standout one that had lots of negative versus positive. And you may say, well, what's going on? Why is that so negative? So this is our kind of organic word cloud of just looking at words that come out organically that have got some kind of negative sentiment on them. And again, I'm just using this sort of out-of-the-box word cloud analysis from Brownwatch. Some tools will do this well. Some tools are really not good at this at all. But then what I'm doing here is I'm saying, right, well, I'm trying to look for some themes in here that can link them together. You've got kind of obvious stuff, customer service, contract. But you can actually see I've circled 6 different ones that have to do with their signal. So 4G is the biggest one. So I'm actually this is a data set I looked at from March, I think it was actually January 2013 through to March 2014. So this is, when 4G had been launched, they were the first to launch 4G, so they got a lot of positive about that. But then what's people's experience been like with that over the last the next sort of year or so? So then what we do is I've written a rule into the data that looks out for anything to do with 4G or signal or bad connection, a whole series of words, and I've programmed that into the tool. Some tools, again, can do that, some tools can't. Get yourself a tool that can if you want to do that sort of analysis. And any mention across any of the 4 network providers that we're tracking that mentions that gets put in as a tag saying signal. And you can see that the share of voice of people talking about signal, so of all the tweets and posts about signal, 40% of them are about EE. So although the overall share of voice is less than 40%, this issue seems to be a much bigger issue for them. And again, that's a useful insight. So if you're doing social analysis, try to look at a specific individual issue and look at your share of voice on that issue against your peers or your competitors. Then if we move on, looking at the one before was, this is now looking at share of voice of coverage and signal in specific detail. So the one before is actually share of voice overall. This is now saying that more than half of all the tweets about, social media posts about signal are from EE. And then I'm going to move on now, focus on negative share of voice. So now I'm looking at negative posts about signal. And you can see that's actually 67%. So nearly 2, or actually more than 2 out of every 3 negative posts on social media about the signal from a network provider are about EE. So you can actually see that by diving into the specific detail, you see that's actually a major problem, and that's the single biggest issue that's driving negative coverage. And obviously, I think that's probably the most important reason that people have a phone, right, is to have signal, especially now smartphones and wanting to have a data connection. So a few tips then about dissecting. Begin by breaking down your content by division or product category. So you may find that this is actually fairly straightforward for you as an organisation. You have some very clear product categories that you have, or some very clear divisions. So try to think about the language that people will use when they're talking about that particular product or service. I try to build rules into the data set that you've got that categorises content by those products and divisions. It may also be the case that when you're comparing with your competitors, some of those are head-to-head competitors across the board, so you want to look at your share of voice overall, and others won't be. So don't compare your share of voice against your competitor if you only do one thing that they do, or vice versa. So look at your share of voice against that specific issue. Also, you may have some messages or some themes that you use in your PR evaluation. Where possible, try to use that in your social media evaluation. It is tricky though. Quite often we see that the messaging that people have in social PR evaluation is maybe much more nuanced and tricky to do with automated scoring. So it's not always possible. Also, like I said before, with the sentiment analysis, try to tag your marketing campaigns and responses, because you may want to look at that separately, or you may want to exclude that from results. And also try to avoid getting jokes, and you often see on Twitter facts that get circulated when they're not really facts. So watch out for those. Finally, look out for organic themes. So not necessarily the things that you've got in your overall structure, but look for stuff that just comes out through the results that you haven't anticipated. And try to find ways to either create a separate structure for those, or to find ways of categorising that under the other headings that you've got. So hopefully this is just a few tips from me just about looking at automated sentiment scoring and then how to actually take your data and dissect stuff. And I think the most powerful analysis is when you can actually bring the sentiment scoring and the data dissection in together. So that's it from me, but happy to take questions at the end. I'm just going to pass back to Elaine now.
Great, thank you, Alistair. It was fantastic. We will gather some questions, so please feel free to submit them there under the questions tab. We've got a few questions already. But if you don't mind, I'll fly through a last couple of slides that actually bring to life a user guide and framework that was launched by AMEC earlier this year, because that will actually draw in some of the sentiment analysis work that Alistair has just mentioned. And some of you will be aware of the Chip My Dog campaign that's on the screen at the moment. This was a particularly good example where we were actually able to put the AMEC framework into practice. The Chip My Dog campaign was specifically set up to try to increase the number of people microchipping their dogs. Is an interesting one because in terms of measurement, this was the only variable factor that was going on at the time, i.e. nobody else is going to chip their dogs for any other reason than having been communicated by us here at Defra. So we were able to sort of set out a very ambitious plan and a very ambitious target. And we did aim to try to increase, I think, by about 30 to 50,000 the volume of people chipping their dogs every year as part of our communications objective. And it was the first time I think we've been quite bold in setting a very specific measurement target in that way. I'm not going to go through every detail of it because you can do that on the AMEC website because the Chip My Dog campaign is the case study used in the user guide. But I'll flick through briefly what this did contain to give you the gist of it. It contained everything you'd expect in a standard campaign. Your Facebook, we had a hashtag Chip My Dog, we had some videos of some dogs being chipped, nice and sort of friendly, showing how it was painless for the animals. Some case studies that we put on digital. We worked with a partner organisation, the Dog Trust, who has got a very strong, credible voice in the conversations as well. And we carried out an Ask Defra Twitter Q&A to try to engage the audience and keep the momentum going, in addition to some key celebrities' endorsements along the way. So I think the key, I just need to stress that the key is, although, you know what, we did a lot of work on this, we tried to make sure that it was value for money for the taxpayer, so that when we were carrying out this activity, we were also having support from elsewhere, and other credible voices in this industry were also supporting what we were doing, which was really, really helpful. So I'm going to click straight through to the framework itself, where you can actually see the metrics that we used in this particular example. We looked at, from the very left to the very right, we looked at using the table, trying to move people from just exposure, which you'll see on the left-hand side, right over to moving them into advocacy. And that was really, again, very ambitious on our part. So what I mean by this is typically, if you look at the traditional government campaigns, they've always involved exposure. They've always included some of those metrics that you can see there. And that's all very well, and it raises awareness, and that's good. And sometimes we've even been more ambitious, and we've moved one column across, and we've even tried to encourage engagement, and we've tried to get the audience talking about our topics, which, again, great stuff. But this table is ultimately trying to push us into a place where we're even more ambitious than that again, and instead we're actually trying to move people into making a preference towards our brand. We're trying to impact what they do, as in getting a physical outcome at the end of it, and even more ambitious than that, making them become an advocate of our work. Now, in this scenario, that involves things like people who had maybe had their dogs chipped and then used that as a platform to go on and share that with their friends and family and via social networks and so on, to go on and talk about the chipping experience that they had and that it was good. And I think we do need to be very, very ambitious, and this was a very good example, for not least because we increased the number of dogs chipped by 500%, and we achieved, I think, in the region of 130,000, and in fact a slightly higher figure than that since it has been achieved. But, you know, it was an astronomical difference that we made, and it really demonstrated the value of our communications. And let's face it, these days we're all facing that, whether we're an agency or government or charity. We have to prove our worth, and this is a great way of doing that. I will point you towards the AMEC website, because on the AMEC website you will see a full detailed case study that goes through everything and talks you through it, and a blank version along with a populated version, which I think is really great, because it means that you can go on there and select some of the measurements and metrics that suit your needs. You don't have to select all of them. You select what's appropriate for your campaign, and hopefully that will help you along your measurement journey as well. So that's the framework we just wanted to cover and share with you, and help sort of educate people that there are some tools out there to help us do some of this work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to questions, and I see some questions have come in already via the chat facility there, which is very, very helpful. Thank you to those of you who have submitted some questions. The first question I'm going to pull here is actually going back to something Alistair mentioned. Alistair, you talked about benchmarking and that it being important to compare the industry to what you're doing. I'm just wondering, because that's very, very helpful, but how do we sort of go about that across the industry? How do we select who to compare to? What's the sort of best way to do that? Are there some previous examples that have worked well?
Yeah, so this particular question is actually coming through from a government department, and it's often, if you're a government department or you're a charity, you may be the only people doing what you do, so you don't have a competitor, you don't really have competitors in government like that either. Two ways I'd suggest maybe to approach measuring whether what you're doing is actually getting you the results that you'd expect. First of all, there's always going to be people talking about the subject matter that you deal with. So this particular one, it's to do with environmental programs, and energy. So I would suggest that you look out for, you track social media for discussions about energy or stuff specifically to do with the areas that you are going to be involved in. For two reasons. First of all, you get an idea of what are the volumes like. There's loads of people talking about it, in which case you may think, right, well, we should expect a fair amount of people talking about what we're doing, or it could be that actually it's a very niche subject area and there's not many people talking about us. But that should mean that if you don't get a huge volume of people talking about you, that's okay, because the subject area is quite niche. And also, I suppose sentiment won't necessarily be such a big thing here because it's a subject. But what you do want to look at secondly is who are the people talking about it. So you can get an idea that might be academics, or it could be industry people, it could be the wider public. And so you start to get an idea of the sorts of influencers potentially, or the sorts of people that you'd hope to get talking about you. So try to construct a search. Again, if you're new completely to social media search, then get in touch and we can offer some tips about how to do that. But if you want to give it a go yourself, start maybe with just some of the terminology that you use yourself and searching more widely on Twitter for that. And just the other point I was going to say with comparing yourself is that you may also want to look internationally. There may be, you don't have any competitors because you're in the UK, for example, but are there other organisations doing similar things in other countries? And you may want to then go and look at their success or otherwise in terms of generating social media engagement.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Actually, that's covered a number of the questions that have come in because they're coming in similar themes. But one other thing actually to pick up there, if you don't mind, Alistair, you talked about, and actually I hit on it in mine as well, about ultimately achieving outcomes. So what if there are other factors that are leading to a campaign or leading to an outcome? I know certainly we find that in the Chip My Dog example, there weren't any other factors, so it's very straightforward and easy to measure. We also have other objectives like improving and increasing exports in the UK. That can be a bit more tricky to get the cause effect tied up together. I know there's probably no silver bullet answer to that question, but just wonder what your views are on that.
Yeah, so when you've got very sort of specific inputs, connected with very specific outputs, and there's not a load of other inputs that you can't measure or other outputs you can't measure, that's kind of perfect scenario to do, and then you can potentially with that get an idea of what sort of rate of return perhaps you get. So then maybe if you have another campaign at a later date that does have much wider variety of inputs and outputs, at least you can get an idea of what potentially the rate of return is in terms of engagement or web traffic is from your social media activity. So then you can see, what the other factors, what role the other factors might have had. It goes the other way, that there may have been, might be that, I don't know, maybe you're combining a social media campaign with some direct email marketing or with an event that's going on. The key thing is, always be measuring, always try to measure all the different things that you're doing, even if comms doesn't necessarily form a part. And again, this is why I think PR needs to link up with other disciplines, is to try and have a more kind of universal approach to measurement. So, for example, if you have got, direct marketing or an event going on, the measurement that you've got, you'll have an idea of what sort of impact those have. So when you bring everything together, at least you can get an idea of what the different variables are. It's difficult depending on when the outcome happens. If it's kind of a direct thing, like going to a website, you can actually model things on a day-by-day basis. So you can say, well, we had more social this day and less email activity this day, and this was the result. You can sort of get an idea of the relative effect of those two, and then maybe later on in the campaign it was the other way around. But quite often the outcome might not happen until far after. So it's really tricky. So again, I think you're not always going to be in a position where you can measure based upon the outcomes, but you do want to maybe just get an idea of the overall proportionality, and that's where I think the kind of comparing your events, your activities versus similar organisations is going to give you a clue as to whether you've done well or not. Not necessarily giving you kind of a score necessarily.
Yeah. That's some really helpful advice, actually, and I think some of us share some similar challenges there. But I'm conscious of time. We have run over by 1 minute, so I will wrap up there. But I will point you, if you don't mind this week, please follow #AMEC@work and go onto the amecorg.com website, where there's loads of tools and techniques there to help you out. The Barcelona principles are there as well. Do refresh yourself, take this opportunity, and there's other events throughout the week to sign up to as well, so I'm sure I'll speak to some of you and see some of you over the coming week. Alistair, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone for dialing in, and enjoy the rest of your day.